Welcome back to #lawyered, y'all. Today we have a very big topic that we're digging into, impeachment. Specifically, the second go-around at impeachment for President Trump. Let's get into it. Welcome back, Austin.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of #lawyered.
Hey y'all. So Austin and I are taking full advantage of technology today.
Yep.
So
Making it happen.
We're making it happen. We are making it happen. Anyway, so impeachment, it's what's on everyone's minds. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone, their dog and their sister wants to know, is Trump going to be impeached for a second time? Half the country is probably saying, what is impeachment? And honestly, it's a lot more nuanced than people actually think. And it is not just for the president, which I was reminded of last night.
Yeah, I know. I had a similar experience. And I think it's awesome. This is something that we only get a certain amount of times in our history that we get to talk about this. We've only had a certain amount of times in our country's history where a situation's come up and we can say, all right, let's talk through the impeachment process because it's actually being talked about right now with a public official. So I think it's a great opportunity to really dive into this process because there's a lot of misconceptions about it.
There is, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it. And I definitely want to say, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I've heard is people think that impeachment is only for impeaching and removing the president of the United States, which is actually completely false. It's for removing any public official. Although I'm going to say that with the caveat, right now I'm only thinking of scenarios where federal public officials are being removed, whether it be a judge, whether it be some other federal official capacity.
Yeah.
But the presidents are the most high line.
For sure. And I think that really, when you think of impeachment, yes, technically it's any public official. Most likely, the only way you're going to see it is when you've got a high-profile public official where we've got, like you said, a sitting federal judge. You've got a congressman, man or woman, a senator, a vice president, or a president. That's probably where the most likely scenario you're going to actually see this full-blown process take place.
Absolutely. And then, for impeachment, everyone thinks of Presidents Nixon and Bill Clinton. But, interestingly enough, right, President Nixon resigned before the impeachment process was completed. So he was never, I think, actually formally impeached, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, it is. And it's also crazy in our lifetime. And some people who were alive, back when Nixon was in office, they've got to see 3 different times where impeachment's been in the forefront of everybody's mind. So it really is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So I think one of the biggest things that is important here is let's go ahead and give a little bit of background for people who maybe they're living under a rock. Maybe they're just like, I can't take the politics right now. I just want to do the best I can for my family, which is great. You do you. But let's go ahead, give a quick bit of background. So Austin, where is all of this coming from? Like 30 seconds. We don't need to rehash our 2 prior episodes, but...
Yeah, I was going to say we've been kind of steeped in this for a couple of our past episodes.
We have.
Probably 3 out of the last 4 episodes, or 2 out of the last 4 have been focused on this. And so we're talking about the January 6th event where President Trump spoke, and people are accusing him that he incited the Capitol rioters to go down to the Capitol and storm the Capitol. And that's the conduct that this impeachment process is focused on.
Yes, that he incited violence that resulted in a raid in the Capitol that resulted in, I think, 5 people dying, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's the stats that we've heard. 5 people dying and countless federal indictments that are now coming down on many of the different rioters that were participating.
I'll be interested to see if any of them actually reach the level of felony manslaughter, but...
I will too.
Yeah,
I will too.
Very curious. So anyhow, in a prior episode, we discussed what incitement was, right? Because it's actually a legal term of art, and we gave our opinions on whether or not in that prior episode we actually thought from an academic legal opinion that President Trump y'all, I only had one cup of coffee. I can't talk this morning. Whether or not President Trump fell into that legal category of utilizing words that incited violence. So we discussed that previously, and I'm going to plug ourselves, go back, listen to that episode. But I think also, too, one of the things that people get really confused about when talking about impeachment, right? Everyone thinks of a trial. And so they'll say, oh, you know, I watch Law and Order, I watch Suits, and I know what a trial looks like. You have a jury, you have a judge, you have the prosecutor, you have the defendant, you have the defense attorney. It's a big production, and you know, the jury is a jury of your peers, and it's this very egalitarian process, I almost feel like saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So impeachment is nothing like that. And people get really confused because, for example, one of the hot topics going around right now is that I believe it was the Senate that requested President Trump to appear in person and to speak. And his legal team basically said, no, thank you. And there was a congressman, and I use that term generically because I can't remember the actual individual at this time, but this particular congressman wrote a very scathing reply about President Trump's legal team saying, no, he's actually not going to come in and essentially testify at the Senate impeachment trial. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not he can be forced to using the power of a subpoena. And Austin, just for our listeners who may not know exactly what a subpoena is, what is a subpoena as used within, say, a civil court?
So a subpoena is something that requires a person to appear, and that can either be to give testimony at a hearing, it can be to produce documents or other information in connection with the discovery request. But it basically is an order that lawyers are authorized to order and say, okay, here, I'm going to serve you. We're going to have a process server, give you this piece of paper. It tells you date, time, and why you're appearing, or context of why you're appearing, what the court case is, and then you're forced to appear. Mm-hmm. And if you don't appear, you can be held in contempt, potentially jailed, fined, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because you're in violation of the order of an officer of the court, because lawyers are officers of the court, which I think a lot of people don't know that.
And side note, I love saying that. I think sometimes it can sound a little egotistical, but like being able to say, I'm an officer of the court. I mean, that's got good drama to it for like TV purposes. You know?
I see you're practicing your TV persona right now, perhaps.
Well, we started talking about Law and Order. I figured we got to throw some of that in here, right?
There you go. There you go. Absolutely. All right. So let's just go ahead and this is probably so basic, but basically, let's talk about what a trial is, because I want to set that up so that we can have a sharp contrast with what an impeachment is not.
Yeah,
so, absolutely. Okay, so we have, in the United States, we're just going to talk about Texas state level, because that's where a lot of my practice has historically been, at the state level. So you have civil trials and you have criminal trials, right? They're two different categories. And in either one, at the end of the day, you have an accused, so the defendant, who the plaintiff, if it's a civil case, or the prosecutor, if it's a state case, district attorney, is seeking to hold that defendant liable for something, right? And you have all of this pretrial stuff and procedures and discovery and so on and so forth, and it usually takes at least a year to go to trial, at least on the civil side. And then when you eventually do get to trial, right, there is a whole litany of rules of evidence and then rules of procedure, civil procedure for civil, criminal procedure for criminal, shocker, that are going to govern the manner in which the trial is held and the manner in which the mechanisms, so the procedural mechanisms of the trial occur, as well as governing what evidence is and is not admissible in trial. That goes toward determining if it's criminal, guilt or innocence, and then if it's civil, whether or not there is liability and the amount of liability. And at the end of the day, typically a judge presides. Often your fact finder, the person who is determining the facts, quite literally, is going to be a jury, right? And that's normally what you see on Law and Order, on Suits, what have you. There can also be what are called bench trials, right? And that is where the judge is also judge and jury, which is interesting for a lot of people. So, and I just want to bring one point to the forefront here, because I was thinking about this last night. I found it to be very interesting. In a jury, you basically, so we call it picking a jury, right? It's voir dire. You pick a jury. You pick from a big panel for your trial who's going to be on your jury. It's a jury of your peers. And I think that's really interesting because it's fundamental to our justice system in terms of like you are being judged by your peers. And I think that's been kind of something that creates like the soul of the American justice system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And well, lawyers like to joke and they call it, jury deselection process, because you're really just picking who you really don't want to be on your jury. And that's probably a whole nother episode. But essentially, you have a hand in picking who your peers are to judge your case. Now, remember that, because that is definitely not true with impeachment. So basically, Austin, is impeachment a trial?
It technically it's considered a trial. People talk about it like it's a trial, but yes, exactly. The air quotes is accurate. Probably the only thing that is similar between what you see on Law and Order and an impeachment trial is that the drama is still going to be just as high in Congress and in the Senate, because you got politicians that are going to be grandstanding and doing everything they're doing, just like you see Sam Waterston of Law and Order do, and whenever he's prosecuting somebody. So it's a unique situation. And side note, I do think that we definitely just got some content for a future episode of dissecting a trial and going through step by step, telling our audience how all that stuff works. I think it'd be a great future topic for our listeners.
Awesome. I love that.
But with the impeachment process, it's embedded literally in the Constitution. It's written in the Constitution. It is giving Congress the authority to impeach and remove the president, vice president, other federal civil officers, and it's for this this phrase I've heard a lot, and I kind of like the way the founders phrased it, is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors that a federal official can be removed for based on Congress's authority to do so.
So, all right, let's break it down, because I think that in order to have a good understanding of whether or not the impeachment of President Trump should proceed hinges a lot on people understanding the mechanics of the impeachment process. So again, while part of the impeachment process is technically termed a trial, it really has nothing to do with the trial that you see on Law and Order. So I want to give a quick overview, because it's really confusing if you've never heard of it before.
Yeah, and I think what's funny to me, after reviewing more of this stuff as we prepared for today, it may be easier for people who have no exposure to what an actual legal trial is like. Maybe easier for them to wrap their minds around this than us who are ingrained in, okay, when you have a trial, you do this and you do this, it's governed by this, kind of like you were talking about, Andrea. But here, this is something totally different, and so it's kind of like, for us, about like, how is this a trial? How is this how our process works? Because it's totally foreign to like not going to the courtroom.
I know. I mean, to me, I love rules. Shocker, right? I like rules. And so I like rules because I know what the expectations are and I know how to play the game. And so not that I'm saying impeachment is a game. It's a very serious matter, of course. And so is trial and all legal matters, of course. However, I like knowing how to play, and I like knowing how to win, and I like knowing what's fair and what's not fair. When there are no rules, it's really difficult for me to determine, okay, well, what's fair and what's not, because then to me, it just seems very subjective. And I like having a level of certainty and objectivity. So.
Oh, no rules. It's kind of like we're jumping into family court, kind of the Wild West of everything.
Again, it's really important to understand the mechanics of the impeachment process. So at the end of the day, the impeachment process can be broken down into two distinct processes, right? So the first is that the articles of impeachment are put forth in the House. And the articles of impeachment are basically the allegations against the public official, so here President Trump, of wrongdoing, right? Then at that point, and typically in the modern day, there's usually a committee or sometimes a external organization from the House. So think during the, I think it was President Clinton's impeachment scenario, that a special investigator was appointed in order to determine the facts of the situation and bring the facts to a committee within the House. And then the House at that point, that committee determined whether or not there were allegations, sufficient facts to create allegations of wrongdoing against President Bill Clinton, and then turn that into articles of impeachment. Is that ringing a bell for you, Austin?
Yeah, and it is, and that makes sense, right? They want to have some more investigation before they just haul off and start an impeachment process, because it is such a huge divisive situation.
Absolutely. So moving forward, once you have the articles of impeachment and they're put forth in the House, at that point, and I'm glossing over a lot of details here, the House is going to vote on those articles of impeachment. Now, if there's just a simple majority in the House, not 2/3, just a simple majority of, voting on the articles of impeachment, or AKA the House formally approves the allegations of wrongdoing, which amount to an impeachable offense, right? And we listed those impeachable offenses just a moment ago. Then the articles of impeachment are then approved. And then the House, and this is actually interesting, I didn't know this until recently, the House chooses managers, and I'm using quotes here, to present the matter to the Senate, right? And then the Senate is going to constitute prong number 2 in the 2-part impeachment process. And I think it's really interesting to note that the House has the sole power to impeach. So the Senate can't say, oh, we don't like this president, we want to move forward with articles of impeachment. No. Only the House can determine if they are going to put forth articles of impeachment to impeach a sitting appropriate civil official. So I want everyone to be reminded again, because we hear these terms a lot, but again, there are only particular impeachable offenses. So just because someone doesn't like a president's policy or a president's demeanor, totally fair, everyone's entitled to their opinion, those are not impeachable offenses. The impeachable offenses, again, are treason, and these all have very legal definitions, bribery, and then the last one, which is kind of the gray area, the catch-all, that causes a lot of confusion, even amongst the most academic of individuals, high crimes and misdemeanors. So and we'll get into what high crimes and misdemeanors is in a moment. So now, backing up, we have our situation where the House has now approved the articles of impeachment, and they're going forth. They've selected their managers to present the case for impeachment in the Senate. So the second process is going to be an impeachment trial in the Senate. Trial, and I'm using that in air quotes because, again, the rules of civil procedure and evidence don't necessarily apply.
Yeah, and that's kind of the crazy point is the Senate has the sole authority to try these impeachment trials. It's the only way that it happens, and the Constitution has put forth 3 requirements for the Senate in these trials. It's only 3. We've got a hell of a lot more in our civil and criminal system that govern how we try cases. But first, the members must be under oath during the proceedings. The conviction requires a 2/3 vote, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court must preside over the Senate trial if the president is the one being tried. Mm-hmm. And that's it. You look at our rules of civil procedure in Texas, we've got, I think, somewhere around 700 different rules that go into how we try cases and how we do this, that, and the other. The Code of Criminal Procedure is a book that's about this thick as you look through it. The rules of evidence, although not as lengthy in number, the interpretations and the case law that goes behind what these rules actually mean is voluminous. They've got 3 rules in the Senate trial, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, that blows my mind. And I'm still reeling over the fact that there's not a codified set of procedural and evidentiary rules. Again, I love rules. And so that the fact that there's none that's codified really blows my mind. So it just kind of makes me uneasy.
Well, to me, I think it was obviously, on this show, I always support everything our founders did because we've seen how it stood the test of time and has been the best workable system the world has ever seen.
Yeah. I would
So
agree.
there's rhyme and reason here, but I do think that you're creating a dangerous situation where you have politicians
Mm-hmm.
who we all know part of their job is to get reelected and to put on a show that have no rules in a trial setting, in a setting where someone's being their wrongs, alleged wrongs, are being
Mm-hmm.
examined and a determination is being made. That's kind of a dangerous situation you're putting everything in. Makes for great entertainment, but
I'm
dangerous
sure.
situation.
This will make a great movie one day. And
Absolutely.
another thing that I want to bring forth. So remember when I was making a big deal about how in a typical trial, civil or criminal, the fact finder is a jury and you're judged by a jury of your peers and you get to, in a manner of speaking, pick your jury?
Right.
Okay. That is not the case with the Senate trial. So this is not a jury of your peers. You're being judged by every single senator in America.
Yeah.
And that, to me, kind of blows my mind. Like, look, whatever your feelings are on Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Warren, they're polarizing individuals, frankly.
Right.
And they're polarizing individuals because I personally, in my personal opinion, feel that they have somewhat extreme views.
Yeah.
And I consider myself a moderate person. I think, in my personal opinion, they have extreme views. I would not want someone with extreme views judging me. In fact, when you're going through voir dire, aka the jury selection process, as we call it here in Texas, one of the things that you learn very early on as a lawyer is you remove immediately people that have very extreme opinions, because you want someone that has an open mind and that is going to listen to the story and that is going to judge the accused based on the facts and evidence that are presented during the course of the trial. And so if someone has a really severe opinion going in, typically they're removed from the process and don't make it onto a jury. Here, it's the opposite. You have a lot of extremely polarizing individuals with extreme views judging the president. And the president himself is a very polarizing figure.
Right. Well, and you also got to believe that a lot of the motivation, regardless of what evidence is put out there during the Senate trial, a lot of the motivation for the votes are going to come not really necessarily from the facts that are presented. It's going to come from the political affiliations, the political motivations of the sitting senator. So that's also another crazy wrench to throw in this entire situation.
Yeah, and that kind of blows my mind, is that so much of this is going to be motivated, right, by political theater. And
Right.
So that's another reason why I'm very uneasy about the process. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad process. I'm not at all, because very much Team Founding Fathers, I like what they've done. I think they've done an amazing job. But I think what makes me uneasy is that there have been so few impeachments, especially of the highest office in our country, that while normally in this situation, if this was a civil case or a criminal case, right, and it's a new factual scenario, we would have a lot of case precedent to go on, and we'd be able to pull from different prior cases and make analogies between various different fact scenarios to this one. That's not really an option here because there have been so few impeachments.
Right.
And so it's really the wild, wild west, and it's the Wild West with really polarizing people, a polarizing former president, and there's just not a lot of rules. You know, if the Senate wants to introduce rules of civil procedure and rules of evidentiary procedure to govern the course of the Senate trial, they can. It's completely within their discretion. In fact, there's only, like we said earlier, there's only 3 rules that the Senate members have to comply with when conducting the Senate trial. So they have extremely broad discretion to put in basically whatever rules they want.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are some lawyers that are senators.
Yeah.
And I hope that perhaps those senators that are lawyers will help bring a very, how to put this nicely, sense of order and clear rules to the process, such that there is not a ruling based on subjectivity and a desire for grandstanding for political theater, but that these senators comply with their oath and that they truly are determining whether or not impeachable offenses have been committed. And that, I believe that, if I'm remembering correctly, that is part of the oath, that senators all have to take. It's a different oath than they take when they get into office, but it's an oath particularly for the impeachment trial, and essentially they're going to try to not be super subjective is my understanding.
Well,
massive paraphrasing.
Right. We'll keep the optimism here.
Yeah.
But so the next step of that is to kind of round out the mechanics here. If the Senate votes to convict with a 2/3 majority, then the official is removed. And one of the big things everybody's talking about now, with a couple of viewpoints on it, is that the Senate may also vote to disqualify the official from holding any federal office in the future. So there's a lot of discussion about, well, should they vote to disqualify, if they do convict, should they vote to disqualify him from holding public office in the future, or should they allow him to so they can use him as a punching bag at the next presidential election? There's some different political viewpoints on that. We'll leave that discussion for the audience and everybody else. But that's the ending of the process: is impeachment, go to the Senate trial, you're convicted, see you later, keep it moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if it was a sitting president, the first result of if he was convicted in Senate trial was that he would be removed from office.
Right.
And I say he because we've only had male presidents, but if a female president wants to come along, I would be down for that. Anyway, so the secondary punishment is what you were just describing, which is a prohibition against the impeached individual from holding public office again. So let's turn this discussion around, because I'm sure everyone, or at least me, wants to know what are high crimes and misdemeanors, right? Because this is something that we hear tossed around all the time, and it seems that everyone has an opinion on what high crimes and misdemeanors are. So, should we get into it?
Absolutely. And I think when I hear it, it makes me for some reason think of a pirate ship. I don't know why. High crimes and misdemeanors, like on the high seas. I think that's where we're going with that, which makes sense. I mean, like we talked about in our pre-show discussions, it's an old standard. It's founders adopted it from the English practice, and so of course it sounds kind of elegant and old school, which I'm a huge fan of. But it's not something, much like a lot of things in our law. It's not something you can put into a box and say black and white. This is it. This is not it. So, fun fact, that's the reason lawyers have jobs, is because everything is gray. But it's one of those things that's been discussed over time, but kind of like you alluded to earlier, Andrea, we, in our jurisprudence, we've had millions of cases come through the different courts across our country that have shaped what a law actually says, how it's interpreted. We've only had more than a couple. We've only had several impeachment situations ever even come up. So there's not a litany of different situations we can look to define high crimes and misdemeanors, but it has been shaped a little bit.
It has been shaped. And so I think, again, global politics and American history major in college, love primary sources. I think they're great. I think they provide a lot of context. I think they provide a lot of insight into what the intention behind the words were when they were drafted. So with that in mind, I did look at a few of the comments made by several of the founding fathers and a few of their contemporaries that were predominantly governors of the various different states. I think one was a governor of Virginia and one was maybe the governor of North Carolina, I think, at the time. Anyway, so after reviewing those comments, my understanding of what the prevailing thought in general of high crimes and misdemeanors, what that meant to them, was that those would constitute offenses that were committed by a public official, so here, the president, against the state. Now, I'm sure that's still very generic, right? But when you kind of look into it more and break it down more, it seems that, okay, so there were these offenses that are committed against the state. So basically the president's actions have to be damaging to the actual state, right? So to the country.
Right.
So unfortunately, they didn't really give a lot of concrete examples, and there were a lot of discussion as to the various different, what things would constitute offenses against the state. But examples of those actions would probably include, but they're not necessarily limited to, say the president had a significant abuse of power of a government office, right? So think of Nixon. Nixon abused his position as president in the United States by essentially impeding the Watergate investigation, right?
Right.
Okay. So, and then another ground would be misapplication of funds. So if the president was out there, wildly, spending funds left and right and willy-nilly with no thought to the benefit of the American people, that would be a problem too. And then neglect of duty, although no one has ever been impeached for that, interestingly enough. Not to mean that they wouldn't be, it just hasn't come up in the past. And corruption. So that's kind of it. It's very up in the air, and it just centers around, did the president's actions create an offense against the state? Yeah. And so it's very nebulous. But one thing I thought was quite interesting when I was reading these old school commentaries is that policy grounds or policy differences are not sufficient grounds to proceed with an impeachment trial. And I found really interesting, actually, that the founders discussed including the phrase maladministration into the explicit list of treasonable offenses, so right up there with treason and bribery. But eventually, it was specifically not included, the phrase maladministration. And maladministration, it was not included, right? So administering the duties of your office poorly or badly, it was not included. And I think that says a lot. Just because you weren't good at your job doesn't mean you should be impeached.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And Andrea, the way you dissected that is important kind of for our listeners to understand that a lot of times when we go back to look at whether it's a specific law enacted by Congress or like what we're talking about right now, what was included or not included in the Constitution, that legislative history behind it actually does hold some weight when you don't have a lot of case law to look at. So the fact that there was discussions about including it and then there was a specific choice not to include it speaks volumes, because that should be given weight when we're considering the idea of let's say the question is, should maladministration be included, or should that be a basis for impeachment? Well, the founders talked about it, decided to leave it out. Then we have to follow what their intent was, and we need to interpret this that way, which means can't include it, can't use it as a way to justify impeachment.
Which I think is shocking for a lot of people, right? Because whatever your feelings are on President Trump, he was most certainly a dramatic, colorful, and polarizing figure, wherever you sit. I think we can all agree on that. And a lot of people think that, just because he didn't have the appropriate demeanor some people feel that he didn't have the appropriate demeanor and mannerisms for someone in his office. Okay, well, that's not grounds for impeachment, right?
Right.
Just because he doesn't fit the style that you think is appropriate, not an impeachable offense. So, but let's back this up, right? Because I'm sure people are saying, oh my gosh, y'all, just answer my question. Did President Trump commit an impeachable offense at his January 6, 2021 rally? Did he do it? Did he incite the violence? Is this an impeachable offense? Just answer me already. And Austin, what do you think? I mean, I know previously we discussed what the incitement of violence was within the First Amendment in a prior episode and how that's not protected speech. But right. So my opinion on it, and I'm gonna use the word opinion because, candidly, as we've discussed in this episode, this is not going to be a criminal trial. It's going to be highly charged through politics and really the optics of the entire situation. In my opinion, I think that President Trump does have a shot at going all the way through this process, being impeached and convicted, in my opinion. I don't think there's going to be any criminal matters that come out of it, but I do think that you could take what happened at the Capitol, and although his speech was protected by the First Amendment, that really doesn't matter in these processes because the Senate can kind of throw the rules out the window. I think that you could take his statements and the Congress could justify an impeachment, the Senate could justify a conviction. Could and will are two different things, but that's my personal opinion on the matter. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Andrea? I think there's the political theater aspect, and then I think there is the let's actually be as objective as possible and analytical about it answer. From a political theater aspect, a lot of people, including a lot of Republicans, are no longer on board with supporting President Trump because of the riots that happened, right? And I certainly don't condone the violence. I think that that was a very poor decision, and it was terrible that there was loss of life. So those rioters, bad news bears. Yeah, I don't want anything to do with them. I think they're not good people. Now, that being said, I think that there is a lot of political theater going on with people choosing to unhitch their wagons from President Trump when they were formerly Republicans, and most of them were formerly Trump supporters, at least within Congress. And now, in order, I think, to maintain the highest chance of re-election, if you will, for their next election cycle, they're going to want to show in political grandstand that they are no longer associated with President Trump, right? The president who's being impeached for allegedly inciting violence on the Capitol, and they're going to be moving away. So I think in order to save their own skins, there might be enough votes in the Senate where they say, okay, I need to look out for myself, so I'm going to move forward with impeachment so that there's no question of me being associated with someone who's been accused of inciting violence.
Right.
So I think that's one answer. But I think from an academic perspective, right, and this is just my personal opinion, because, and there's going to be a lot of discussion, because again, as much as we want to look at the historical context of what high crimes and misdemeanors is, right, what does it mean? There's been loads and loads of debate with people who are literally spend their lives analyzing what the Constitution means. And so there's going to be a lot of debate about that. But personally, from an academic perspective, I don't think that President Trump, when speaking to a rally of his supporters, granted, some of his words were in poor taste, I think, and he definitely, I think, could have been a bit more mindful of how his words could inflame the emotions of his supporters. But given the actual language that President Trump used during his speech at the January 6, 2021 rally, I just don't think it was foreseeable, right, that there was going to be this rally and there was a rally, that there was going to be a raid on the Capitol that wound up with people getting killed. I can't think of another time in history. There hasn't been another time in history that happened, because the only other time the Capitol was ever breached and raided was in 1814, and that was thanks to the British, not Americans. So I think from an academic perspective, just because you had strong, emotionally charged words at a rally, I have a hard time, because I also don't think that he was inciting violence from an academic perspective. I have a hard time seeing how those words constitute an offense against the state, right? He wasn't, unlike Nixon, who, again, wasn't impeached because he resigned, he wasn't abusing his office by holding up some sort of investigation. Trump didn't use his office to go in and formally cause a delay in the count of the Electoral College, right? He didn't say, this department within the executive branch needs to go in and basically literally hold up the count of the Electoral College votes. He didn't misappropriate funds. He didn't do actions that I think constitute an offense against the state, right? Because an offense against the state means, to me, a massive breach of the public trust, whether you're abusing your office to hold up a critical, fundamental working of government, like Nixon did, at least in my opinion, right? We won't know for sure if that was impeachable because he was never impeached because he resigned, or you are basically embezzling money from taxpayers, or you are... Those are the examples I go to. I think it has to be a really severe offense that literally hits at the fundamentals of government. You are fundamentally causing a problem and not allowing the government to function properly. Yeah.
Well, and Andrea, that's, part of the reason I love co-hosting the show with you. Like, the way that you're dissecting this is exactly the way that we really should be looking at this is, okay, academically, based on what the law actually says, based on what the Constitution says, really does it rise to that level? No, I don't think so. But we also realize that the rules get thrown out the window here, and we are in the arena of political theater. And I think that you set that up and dissected that perfectly for our listeners, because it really is two different ways of looking at it. There's probably, in our opinion, a correct way to look at it. You really dive into and look at it, and I'm going to use the term you're using in the academic sense, because that's, I mean, our document that runs this country was written in that way. Unfortunately, I think that I agree with you that it's going to be looked at in the political theater sense. It's going to be analyzed that way, and a result is probably going to come through that arena with probably a lot of disregard for the academic side of things. But I do think you broke that down perfectly for those two different ways of looking at it, and that's the way that you should look at it, and understand. Our listeners need to understand that these two scenarios, they're not mutually exclusive, but there's one way to look at it. It's probably going to get looked at the other way. Yeah,
there are definitely those different perspectives. And then another question that I have, and I think is good for discussion, is, and this is something I actually want to understand, is what's the utility in impeaching President Trump now that he's out of office? And I know some people are probably going to say, oh, well, he didn't really leave office because Biden wasn't properly elected. I mean, there are those people, and you know what? You have your opinions. You are entitled to them. I always recommend doing a lot of research before taking very strong opinions like that, but everyone is entitled to their opinion, of course, and I am happy to respect it. It's not what I think personally, but
right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, what is, if for all practical purposes, President Trump is now out of office. And at the end of the day, there's really two punishments, right? Two punishments that happen if a president is impeached and there is, the Senate chooses like, hey, we're going to indict you for an impeachment, or sorry, indictment probably is the wrong word. We're going to go ahead and say, yeah, you're impeached. That's the outcome of this trial. The automatic outcome is that president is then the president or the public official is removed from office. Well, President Trump is already out of office. So that's off the table. We're done. That's done. So the only other punishment, if you will, is that President Trump would be barred from holding public office again. So I don't, is there a utility here? Like, what do you think, Austin?
Well, I think aside from the obvious that, okay, you could keep him from holding office again if the Senate were to convict. Okay, obviously that's one potential purpose of doing this. Sure. I think the other two are going to be more political in nature. One is sending a message to future public officials: you can't act this way. If you could be impeached and convicted by the Senate if you act this way. And two, I think it's what you mentioned earlier. Certain senators are going to be trying to save face, try and distance themselves from the acts that happened on January 6th. And I think that's, in their minds, probably the utility of moving forward with this, is to create that perspective for their constituents.
Yeah, and I definitely see that. So it sounds too that, you're kind of touching on the argument that at the end of the day, it's not necessarily utility for some people that they want to move forward with the impeachment, but it's the principle of the matter, right? Sending a warning to future public officials and to future presidents that this sort of behavior is not tolerated and you could be impeached for it. And that is the principle, and that for some people that's sufficient to move forward with it.
Yeah, I think that sums it up perfectly.
Okay. And I can respect that. I'm still actually trying to determine my feelings on the subject about the utility versus the principle of the matter, because I do see the merits on both sides of the argument. So, Austin, impeachment. Any final thoughts, last words, feelings, commentary, political grandstanding?
I'll stay away from political grandstanding. I'll save that for some other episodes.
Okay, that sounds great.
I think that the biggest thing is that people need to understand is a very unique process, and this is a unique time in our country's history, so pay attention to what's going on.
So, Austin, rapid fire question. If President Trump can prove his allegations, and this is purely a hypothetical question, right? I love hypotheticals. can prove that his allegations of election fraud were true, then what does that do for his impeachment trial?
If he can prove that they're true, then okay, that helps support the underlying reasons for why he was saying the things he was saying. It takes away some of the accusations that his statements on the Hill that day were false. Here's my procedural strategic thought about it, though. It's always harder to prove something than to disprove something. Always strong term. It's usually is more difficult. In this situation, it's going to be more difficult.
Sure.
And two, I agree with Trump's legal team. I was asked this question on a radio show the other day. Would you put President Trump on the stand? Absolutely not. I mean, in a criminal trial, which again, this is not criminal trial. It's 99.9% of the time you do not put your defendant on the stand because they have their Fifth Amendment privilege, all that kind of stuff. Don't want to subject them to cross-examination. So for all those reasons, you don't want to subject President Trump to examination in front of the Senate just because of the situation itself. Second, if President Trump is my client and I see what he does whenever he's not being cross-examined in front of a microphone, I sure as hell don't want him to be cross-examined in front of the Senate whenever he can be convicted. So, and in order to prove the election fraud, I think he would have to get up there and do some. I mean, there would be a lot of other evidence that would go into it, but there's going to have to be some testimony there, and that just seems like a complete train wreck if you try to pursue that type of defense theory.
And for the record, my question was a hypothetical because I do think it's an interesting hypothetical, and people have asked me that. And so that's why I wanted Austin's thoughts on it, because I was curious to see what Austin would say, and he did not disappoint. All right, y'all. Well, there is the overview of impeachment for you, and that is our perspectives on the upcoming Senate impeachment trial. Although it's upcoming at time of recording, but by the time of release, it may have already happened. So I will let our producer handle the timing on that one. But y'all, thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for closing arguments. It involves none other than Taylor Swift.
Love it.
Love it.
Thank you guys again for listening to us here on #Lawyer. Go find us on whatever platform it is that you listen to your podcasts. Go like the podcast, go follow and subscribe to us. Leave us a review, leave us a rating. That helps us to really get the word out and really continue to tell you guys about all the different things that are going on in law and business here in Dallas. Make sure you check out our videos on our YouTube channel. It's #Lawyered. And then also follow us on our Instagram account. It's at #Lawyered. DM us, send us some issues, some topics you'd like to discuss, or some things that maybe you just don't understand about the law, because we want to make sure and cover and give you what it is you want to listen to.
Welcome back to Closing Arguments. On today's menu, a theme park in Utah is suing Taylor Swift. That theme park is named Evermore. Take a wild guess as to what the theme park is suing Taylor Swift for. Did you say trademark infringement? You would be 100% correct. So what's the problem? The theme park says that people are now getting confused as to whether the theme park and Taylor Swift's album Evermore are related. Personally, I think they're just reciting the elements and it's not really a real confusion. But hey, let's have a trial and see what happens. Also, love Taylor Swift.